Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Well, okay. Hello, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, December 29th, 2020, getting towards the end. Just a few days left. Yeah, another one of those short weeks, I think. Friday, I don't know, man. I could really use another day. We'll see how that goes on Friday, but I'm planning to be out that day. Not that New Year's Eve is such a long haul for me. I mean, I'm up past midnight most nights anyway. So, sometimes New Year's Eve is about the earliest I get to bed. But, the Friday rest is a pretty good thing. I enjoy it. A lot of religions incorporate that into their weekly practice anyway. Maybe I should too, except, okay. Well, I can't leave you hanging every Friday. Don't know whether we'll get a chance to record anything. There certainly are a lot of stories. So we'll see if we can cram everything in this week. As a matter of fact, we can tell you that it looks like we'll be super packing the Thursday show, as Ian Reifowitz is planning to join us for the 10 o'clock hour after Greg Dworkin's appearance on Thursday. Today, though, is Tuesday. That's a Joan McCarter day, and everything appears to be on track to have her join us. Nothing looks to be going too crazy. Staff on hand should be able to handle things so that she can join us for a visit. And what a day to do it. There's lots of congressional action. Usually there's not. I guess at about this point in the year, although, I guess at the end of the year, in the second session of any Congress, there's a scramble to try and take care of any last-minute business, even during after a midterm election, but especially at the end of a presidential term, and especially at the end of a presidential term which appears to be the last of that sitting president. So anyway, lots of activity. Yesterday, the House succeeded in passing the additional funding for the proposed $2,000 relief checks. I'm still not sure exactly what we're supposed to be calling them. A lot of people are referring to it as a stimulus check or a stimulus act. And I think the people who are behind the design of it for a while were pushing everybody. Anyway, maybe they just gave up. I think they still believe this, but they were pushing everybody to, it's not a stimulus. We're not just doing it because we need the economy stimulated. We're doing it because people need direct relief from the pandemic, and they ought to be called relief checks. And a lot of people doing yeoman's work and trying to maintain that. But I don't know. For some reason, everybody thinks of these checks as stimulus, and that name tends to stick. Didn't happen over at the front page of Daily Kos, where Joan was doing the writing. She just sort of refers to them as direct COVID-19 payments, and that seems correct. I was reading a little bit about the mechanics of the payments, and I guess they're actually, what are their tax rebates is what they're referring to them as, but they're not coming after filing of taxes. I guess this is a direct rebate from your 2019 taxes, which I guess is why part of the reason why everything is keyed to your 2019 income. It may also just be that that's the only data they have on hand, and that's the latest that they've got. That was kind of a weird, weak point of the bill. But anyway, it's passed. The important part for us, I guess, would be the procedure, and also, the money would probably be of interest to many of you as well. But, we focus on the procedure here. Maybe too much. But I think everybody learned something yesterday. Either you learned something new about the ins and outs of procedure, or you learned that you just can't listen to the show anymore because there's too much procedure. But they did it. As you heard yesterday, they used the suspension of the rules procedure to do it, and there was some risk involved in that because the trade-offs for the efficacy of going with suspension of the rules and shorter debate, etc., is that you have to get 2/3 of the vote in order to win. Now, ordinarily, when everybody is in attendance in the House, that would be 290 votes out of the 435 in the House. But with the recess recently and COVID and many other factors involved in this. They just didn't have full attendance for voting, either in person or remotely, yesterday. And so would have been a timely reminder to tell everybody. I guess if we had set the bar at 290, everyone would have been worried, because they got fewer than that, and yet it passed. And that has to do with the fact that what you're looking for is not 290 regardless of attendance, but you need 2/3 of those present and voting in order to suspend the rules. Just as same thing, by the way, for just passing things by regular order and simple majority. 218 is the ordinary number of that constitutes a majority of a full House. No relation to the television program of the same name. No, I don't think there's any relation. Anyway, but if something less than the full House are in attendance, either because there are vacancies in the House or people simply just don't show up and record their presence, you simply take the number of those present and voting and, divide by 2 and make sure you're 1 over in order to cover things. Or in the case of suspension of the rules, divide by 3, multiply by 2, and then make sure you're 1 over. The math is complicated, but you know how to do it inherently. I don't need to explain it to you. So yesterday they were able to pass with 2/3 with, good. Jones got a screenshot from C-SPAN there. 275 to 134. Is that the, I assume she would have chosen a screenshot that was reflective of the final vote. Yes, here it is in the text. So there you go. 275 votes was enough to do it. There were 21 members not voting. Nobody voted present, by the way, which is a way of abstaining. And if you vote present, that counts. So that will help change the math. If everybody shows up and votes present, they are present and voting, but not voting yay as the vote not voting yay to pass it, and not counting in the 2/3, therefore. But anyway, they made it, and it goes on to the Senate. And we can talk a little bit about that, too, because that's of great interest as well. A lot of people, your typical reaction out there in the rank and file, lots of people interested in, for whatever reason, in assuming that it would be impossible to pass the Senate, and so therefore this is only symbolic. Others saying, sure, it's only symbolic, but it gives us a chance to beat up on Republicans and possibly win in the Georgia runoffs and run against all the Republicans who oppose this thing in 2022 who might be up for election, all of which is true. And and you could be excused for being somewhat pessimistic. A lot of things do go this way, but and it's unpredictable times. Ordinarily, I think we would say that with the president of whichever party leaning on people and saying this is the way we want to go, and it being a relatively popular measure and passing by such an overwhelming margin in the House, ordinarily would be an overwhelming margin, 275 to 134. Because this was a suspension of the rules, I guess they just about made it. But under normal circumstances, if it were a majority vote, you would say, boy, that's a lot. 44 Republicans joined in voting yes on what ended up numbered H.R. 9051, very high bill number, by the way. It's, they do these things in sequential order, so that's how they got the number up so high. But Greg actually sent me somebody else's tweet yesterday noting, gosh, that's an awfully high bill number, though. There must have been a lot of bills filed in this Congress, and as it turns out, it's nearly a record-breaking number. Not that any of them went anywhere. But this now moves on to the Senate, and there, too, people just saying, well, the likelihood of it actually passing, Republicans are really super cynical. They might just buck the president, or that this is all an act, and the president simply endorsed it for some political reason, knowing that the Republicans in the Senate would kill it, and that he'd never be in danger of, actually helping anybody. But he might not be that strategic. I don't know if he thinks that much about it. He just wants to hurt whoever he wants to hurt at the moment. And at the moment, he's actually kind of angry at the Republicans running in the Senate races down in Georgia for whatever reason. So they're in trouble. They're scrambling to try to figure out what to do. Greg also sent me Axios's roundup of the story, the savvy take on things. And I guess the importance of this piece is that even the savvy pundits who are jaded and have seen it all seem to see a shift in what's going on in the Senate. Well, at least they wanted to say so in their headline. Anyway, Senate tide begins to shift as Trump continues to push for $2,000 checks. So I guess he's still doing it. Roundup compiled here by Margaret Talev and Mike Allen. Let's see, the text down below, and their weird format, the way they put these things. Anyway, the story starts out, a couple of days ago, it looked impossible that $2,000 COVID relief checks, up from the $600 checks for individuals in the package President Trump signed Sunday, could pass the Senate. That has changed with Trump's final hours advocacy for bigger checks, Republican sources tell Axios. Their stupid little way of putting things here. The state of play. What's up? It's an uphill battle. That's what's up. But Republican senators are feeling more pressure from constituents, pumped by Trump, to do more. This is a very interesting story, and I wanted to share all of this just to give you some sense of, we do go through this from time to time. And like I said, everyone could be excused for being pessimistic about these things from time to time. And it's not a done deal, and anything can happen, and a lot of these people are crazy. But it is worth noting that very often we go through this situation where, look, all these people said they were against it, and they even came out yesterday and said they were against it. But when the president of the United States, even if he's a crazy a-hole like the one we've got, keeps pressing on something that you can fairly, I think, expect to be relatively popular, people getting money, right? That does change things. And people who go on record and say no sometimes change their mind and become yeses. It does happen. But it also happens that savvy outlets print that things are shifting and then they don't end up shifting in the final analysis. But anyway, just a lesson, really. And this is how you do it, right? It seems impossible, but you press it anyway. Of course, we also have to deal with the perennial super pessimists, like I guess we also should have expected, as we did see among the rank and file. As soon as it passed the House, Chuck Schumer said, well, among other things, we will make a unanimous consent request to pass the House's bill on the Senate floor today. And again, as if they hadn't watched what happened the first time in the House, people came, Chuck Schumer, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's going to ask for unanimous consent. All that has to happen is a Republican and say no, and then that's the end of the whole thing. No, it's not the end of the whole thing. Just as in the House, they can bring it to a vote later on, and just as in the House, asking unanimous consent is a quick way to say, well, if no one objects, we can pass this thing. You just do it. It's like a freebie. It's a gimme. And even if you know someone is going to object, well, make them do it, because you can get the chance to have a roll call vote on it possibly soon anyway. So go for it. And if Mitch McConnell is going to block the vote somehow from being held at all, then what the hell's the difference? Keep asking for unanimous consent. But, there's a faction out there that wanted to insist that Schumer was somehow short on strategy and was doing this on purpose so that it would lose and he needed to be replaced. I saw somebody, for whatever reason, tweeting, we got to replace Schumer with Amy Klobuchar. She would fight. Well, I don't know whether she would or she wouldn't fight any differently. She'd certainly be asking for unanimous consent to pass the thing, though. I don't know why anybody thought that was different. Anyway, continuing with what Axios had to say, they said, still an uphill battle, but Republican senators are beginning to feel more pressure from constituents pumped by Trump to do more. It could be too politically risky, they say in their first bullet point with bold lettering, for some Republican senators to vote no. If Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell brings it on the floor, it might get 60, which would mean, of course, being able to overcome any filibusters of the bill itself or motions to get to consideration of the bill. Then Trump can claim victory, said a Republican source who provided a breakdown of how the vote could go. Not that they would provide that to us, but then the next section says, driving the news. What's driving the news? a quote, apparently, from Marco Rubio. Not the Bible, but something else. I am concerned about the debt, but working families have been hurt badly by the pandemic. Wow, you think? This is actually a tweet yesterday from Marco Rubio. This is why I supported $600 direct payments to working families, and if given the chance, we'll vote to increase the amount. All right, fine. Good. Senators to watch include Rand Paul of Kentucky and Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. I guess they're the ones to watch because they're crazy enough to somehow say no. Watch them with one or two other spending hardliners needed, I guess, to, I don't know, to what? I'm not sure what you would do with one or two other spending highlights. I think you'd need considerably more than that to stop it. But anyway, the House yesterday voted overwhelmingly, again, 275 to 134 for $2,000 checks, with 44 Republicans joining almost all Democrats. It's true there were, two Democrats who voted no on the thing, and I haven't bothered to look up who they are. Maybe they're, Joan probably knows by now. It might even be in her story, and we can check it out. But I did see at least one or two of their comments repeated on Twitter yesterday. They were nonsense. It just didn't make any sense, the objections that they were making. I did see somebody say, oh, well, people who are making too much money will be getting these checks. You'll recall that when they were $600, they were phased out, I think, in $5 increments or something like that. Or was it $5 increments from $75,000 in income up to $99,000 was the phase out. Under 75, you qualified for the full $600, and after $99,000 in annual income, you got zero. That was a pretty narrow band, so it was pretty sharply targeted. And it was kind of interesting to note that they said, well, people who are making too much money will be getting some of this. It's not targeted enough, but the targeting mechanism was relatively similar. There was more money to phase out, so I guess the checks go up even higher. And at $5 per $100 in income, I guess it could stretch out. I don't know whether the bill that they actually passed accelerates the phase out increments or not. I think it might not. It was a fairly simple bill. We can actually look at the text if you want. But the complaint was that too many rich people will be getting money that they shouldn't, which is kind of a weak excuse. You can tax that money straight back if you think it's a real waste of time. But also, I think it essentially came down to, well, you'll still get, a couple of bucks if you're making a six-figure income, which is entirely possible. I don't know. But anyway, the complaint was that, people making six-figure incomes would be getting so much money. And it was interesting because the day before, or the last time that they passed this measure with the $600 in it, this guy had voted for it. And his pinned tweet at the time, I'll look it up to see who it was. His pinned tweet at the time was that he was so proud of having voted for the $600 check measure, and that the relief was so highly targeted. And the same targeting mechanism is in place here, but now he says, oh my God, it's terrible. Well, it applies differently. That's true. I don't know. We'll see if we can't do the math or discuss the math of it at some point. But it was kind of a ridiculous objection. And then there were some Republican objections that included objections like, well, if you give people this money, they'll just go and spend it at Walmart. I think it's also Best Buy and Amazon, which, that's kind of what we were hoping that they would do. Although he also said, they might pay down credit card debt. Also not a bad thing. I don't know what he thought happens to money that goes to people, whether they earn it or it's given back from taxes or whatever. But that's what happens to money in this economy. I don't know how to satisfy your itch on that one, sir. Nobody's going to be creating jobs, but that's because even the rich people who get money back aren't creating jobs with it. All right. Well, anyway, more importantly, I think we plow ahead here by pointing out the other bullet points in here. One of them's got a red bullet point. Why? I don't know. A Wall Street Journal editorial today calls the president's push for $2,000 checks a Donald Trump in-kind contribution to Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden. Okay. Not sure what that's supposed to be. What is this weird bullet point that they're using here. They got regular black bold bullet points and then this red thing, but it's like, oh, okay. It's a boxing glove icon, emoji sort of thing. And it's not an emoji, but you know how we have the little pictures to deal with now. A boxing glove. So that's supposed to be like a punch being thrown, I guess. All right, well, very weak. Anyway, if McConnell allows a vote, the Journal argues, it, quote, would split the GOP caucus and upset fiscally conservative voters. It probably really wouldn't even upset fiscally conservative voters, quite honestly. But anyway, it could slightly split the GOP caucus. Of course, they could unite behind the checks and then be united and I guess hailed as heroes. They certainly wouldn't be punished by deficit hawks because everyone knows the deficit doesn't matter anymore. Plus, it's okay if you're Republican. What's next? That's the important part. Senate consideration of $2,000 checks is unlikely to begin before Friday, after Senator Bernie Sanders, oh boy, threatened to delay an override of Trump's veto of the defense spending bill over McConnell's reluctance. So that's kind of an interesting move, too. I guess he thinks he's leveraging McConnell, because there's the possibility that McConnell could just say, you know, forget it. Like every other House bill, we'll just let this one languish. And if we don't pass it, nothing happens. And it won't be too bad in his mind in terms of backlash, because $600 checks still slated to go out. But, you know, everybody's going to miss that additional $1,400 or more if you've got a family. So it's not like they'll forget about it. But, you know, it's the end of the session. And he might be able to just say, hey, we just couldn't get to it. So I guess Sanders' move here is to say, well, I know that McConnell wants to have a vote on overriding the Trump veto of the NDAA. So I will say I'll block that unless you guarantee us a vote, or we already, you know, you actually give us the vote on the $2,000 check measure. And then I'll get out of the way and you can clear the NDAA for a veto override. And I don't know. Not certain whether that really brings the right kind of pressure on McConnell or not. I guess I got to think this through. But if they don't override the veto of the NDAA, it will screw with things, but not horribly. Trump's already out, so he won't have any electoral backlash. The Republicans are done running for office. The two in Georgia, I guess, could face some backlash, but I don't think the NDAA carries as, I mean, it'll be a big deal in Georgia. It'll be a big deal everywhere. And it'll cause some disruption, and you can be accused of defunding the troops, and all of that is true. But also everyone knows that the new Congress, the 117th, will come straight back probably in mid-January and pass largely the same bill, if not exactly the same bill, and let it wait for, I mean, they can actually just start work on it right away and even pass the thing right away, and then just hold it in the enrollment process such that they don't dispatch it to the White House until Biden is inaugurated, and then send it to him and he can sign it. Even if he's not president when they pass the thing, they can just wait out the Trump administration. Presumably, assuming that there's no coup after all. But, I don't know whether that'll work. On the other hand, I don't know how much pressure Bernie Sanders feels about overriding the veto on the NDAA. He may very well vote to support that for various reasons, but I don't think he's super enthusiastic about a big military authorization bill. And it is only an authorization bill. It's not an appropriations bill, so operations won't shut down. It's just about authorizing programs for next year and into the future that will be appropriated for in 2021 and going forward. So it's not even, taking money out of the pockets of the troops or anything quite like that. But there are other measures that have been tucked into it, including the very interesting measure from Carolyn Maloney that everyone's now taking notice of. I think we mentioned it a week or more ago, the transparency rules for LLCs and pass-through corporations. They'll make it a lot easier to track down who owns it and where the money goes, and it's a good anti-money laundering measure. And I always thought that was probably more dangerous to Donald Trump than anything, certainly more dangerous to him than the stupid idea that, we got to veto this bill because it's going to rename military bases and strip the names of Confederate Civil War generals off of the bases. I don't know whether he really ever cared about that for real. Anyway, so there we have it. That's where we stand. I was going to do the math for you. Maybe we can squeeze that in before we do the break. Just the math on the suspension bill. There were 409 votes cast. Wow, that seems like a low number. Yeah. And then 21 not voting, which I guess means we're sitting at 5 vacancies at the moment. Anyway, 409 votes cast. 1/3 of that is 136.3. 2/3 of that is 272.6. So you would need 273 votes to pass this thing. So they got 275. So, if you take into consideration that it was under suspension of the rules, you would say they barely passed the thing. But everybody else is reporting it was an overwhelming margin. That too may have been, certainly because of the suspension procedure. But I was going to say that too may have been part of the strategy behind using the suspension procedure rather than regular order, because people would want to see the thing passed, and some Republicans, they guessed, were under the same pressure that they hope to put on Republican senators as well. This makes for a good demonstration of that popularity and clears the way, and it establishes, as Greg would tell us, a permission structure for Republican senators to, abandon their usual aversion to additional spending to actually help people and vote with it. 44 Republicans in the House is nothing to sneeze at. 130 of them voted no on it, of course, so they have plenty of cover there. But this does give the appearance of an overwhelming margin, and most people don't know that it actually just squeaked by because of the procedure, and they can point to it and say 275 to 134. How could you guys say no? And it seems to be working. Axios thinks so. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Networks Radio. Okay, let's see. Here is the tweet from Molly Reynolds that Greg shared with me earlier. Was the person who was noting the high bill number for this thing. The $2,000 checks measure that the House just passed is numbered H.R. 9051, which seemed like a high number to me, the bill number, not the $2,000. Turns out the 116th Congress has featured the most H.R. numbered bills, and that's the number that House of Representatives gives to their bills. But I guess she means actual bills as opposed to resolutions, which are, not bills. Apparently they have some sort of different name. I mean, they're resolutions, but I don't know what other sorts of names they might hang on it as a general catch-all phrase. But anyway, they get different numbers. House resolution, H-res, same thing, numbers, 1, 2, 3, etc. There are House concurrent resolutions, House joint resolutions, simple House resolutions. Anyway, the most HR numbered bills since the 95th Congress, which covered the years 1977 and 78. And with the exception of the 96th Congress, which had 8,500 bills or so, it's not especially close. So quite a larger number. And, it doesn't mean anything in particular, but it's, you could search for some meaning. but you couldn't get it just straight out of the number. But a lot of activity, not a different, well, it's a different number. I don't know what the numbers were with respect to how many of the bills were passed in the House. And we know that an extraordinarily low number of what did pass the House ever got action in the Senate. But, worth pointing out. I guess we could also take a moment to point out the provenance of the bill. And one of the favorite games on Capitol Hill that gets played, many of you likely saw a couple of days ago when when Trump first made his statement and saying, that he thought that the check should be $2,000. He pulled this thing out of his hat at the last moment and says the checks ought to be $2,000 instead of $600. And AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, tweeted, good, that'd be great. We should do that. And that they could do it very quickly. And she said that she and Rashida Tlaib had an amendment to that effect, which they, I guess, had hoped to offer to the original, omnibus bill, which went out under the number, by the way, of H.R. 133. But that they hoped to offer an amendment to do just that. And so that the legislative language was already in existence, and you could just turn it into a bill and give it an H.R. number and submit it and move that. And I'm sure that they went ahead and did that. And I think I actually found where they got it. So what was the bill number that we just said that we were looking at? Was it no, I didn't have it in this article, but it was the Axios thing. Did I just close it, though? Right, H.R. 90, it was in the tweet that we were looking at anyway. H.R. 9051. Okay. Anyway, it just so happens that there's a little bit of a story behind it. So Rashida Tlaib did, in fact, have that legislative language ready to go. I went to look to see whether she had tried to offer it as an amendment to H.R. 133, just to verify it, as AOC, I think, had said that she and Tlaib had done. But the House Rules Committee doesn't maintain in the same way that they used to the website that, or at least in the fashion that I'm used to. You used to be able to go and look up the package of information that members were considering when they were looking at a bill, formulating a rule, and all the amendments that had been proposed for consideration were submitted and were there for your review. And this time, it wasn't as easily findable. It may still be available as a package, but I didn't find it as quickly, and I had not much time to do it. Pardon me, a little sneeze for this morning, but I spared you that detail anyway. So, ordinarily you can pick up and look at those things, and I wanted to look because there was a weird controversy going on as people circled back to AOC's statement and said, apparently there's a weird split, even in the squad, between people who are Rashida Tlaib fans and, I don't know what's driving it, and maybe it's the recent controversy over whether or not AOC would be joining what's now become the Force the Vote movement to withhold her vote for Pelosi for Speaker unless Pelosi guarantees a floor vote for Medicaid for all. And I don't know where Tlaib is on that. Maybe she's more strident on it and has said she would do that. I don't know whether that's the split. It might be earlier. But there were apparently Rashida Tlaib fans out there saying, hey, AOC didn't sponsor this thing with Rashida Tlaib. She might have supported it. They may have discussed it in private, but they aren't co-sponsors of this thing. And so I wanted to look at the amendment to see whether it was being offered in the name of both Rashida Tlaib and AOC, and I haven't been able to turn that up. But I did find that Rashida Tlaib did, in fact, she turned the language of this alleged amendment into legislative language and submitted it as a standalone bill. By the way, before I get too far afield from this point that I wanted to make to you. Just a word of caution. I don't really feel like stepping in and helping the forced to vote people because a number of reasons, not the least of which is they're kind of obnoxious in many ways, but lots of people are obnoxious, and I offer them the same help anyway, just legislatively and procedurally speaking. Something I've warned Netroots activists about for a long time. When you do something as vague as demand a floor vote on something, I mean, they think that's being really specific, but it's not specific enough. And you probably, if you've been paying attention the last couple of days, you know where I'm going with this, right? If it were her interest to do this, Nancy Pelosi as Speaker could very well say to you, okay, you want a floor vote on Medicare for all. Did I say Medicaid for all earlier? I didn't mean to. But you want a floor vote on Medicare for all. You got it. Guaranteed. Now go ahead and vote for me as Speaker. They go ahead and do so. What can she offer? I mean, she could just say, also, now screw you. But probably not going to just do that. But what could Nancy Pelosi offer that would fulfill the promise of a floor vote on Medicare for all, but probably at least guarantee that the thing wouldn't actually pass the House, even though there's probably no real reason why you would have to be afraid of that. It's not going to pass the Senate anyway. If you were really worried about it passing being a bad thing, it probably isn't going to get past the Senate anyhow, but okay. But if it did, whatever. I don't know. It's not so bad. Experiment with things. I got no idea what the downside of passing it is in terms of actual execution, but I'm sure lots of you do. Anyway, what could she offer that would say, hey, I fulfilled my promise, you had a floor vote, but you still lost, and if you haven't been paying attention, then you wouldn't be answering right now, a suspension of the rules vote. But if you were paying attention, maybe you did say that, or maybe you didn't, you forgot. But suppose you bring it up under suspension of the rules. Why bother with any of the hard stuff? We're not going to send it to the Rules Committee. No amendments allowed. Your bill, if you've got one, stands unchanged. You get 40 minutes to debate the whole thing, and you got to get a 2/3 margin to pass the House. But there you go. You asked for a floor vote, I gave you a floor vote. The fact that you didn't know that there was such a thing as suspension of the rules that would actually make it harder for you, but easier for me, is on you. Study. Learn what you're doing here in Washington, D.C. Figure it out. It would be mean. Don't know that she's actually inclined to do such a thing. She wants to deal with them straight up, I think. But it has happened before, way back when. I don't remember what the year was, but Adam Bonin can tell you about that one. There was something, I don't even remember what the hell the thing was. I think it had to do with the, internet regulation of some kind, but this was in the days before we were worried about net neutrality. But something that we were worried about, and I wish I could bring it to mind, was similarly being, Netroots advocates were putting pressure on the House to bring a certain measure to the floor, and they did it, and they brought it under suspension of the rules. And, it wasn't a terribly important central, to the survival of the United States or the American way of life sort of piece of legislation. It was kind of niche. So it wasn't, awful. And it could have been considered non-controversial and fit for inclusion on the suspension calendar per se. They don't really have a suspension calendar, but fit for consideration under suspension of the rules. But I think they also knew, as they usually do, when it comes to vote counting, that the thing would not pass. But they would say, we gave it a shot, and lots of people voted for it, and all the people who told you they supported it did support it. It just still didn't pass because you needed a 2/3 vote. And sorry, that's that. And I guess, I don't know. I didn't know what was going on and didn't know what the pressure campaign was. And after the fact, when they were screaming about it, I said, you got rolled, man. You didn't know what you were asking for. And the same thing could happen to the Medicare for all folks. And, part of me actually kind of wants to see it happen, except that, just to teach them that lesson that they don't really necessarily know everything about what's going on when it comes to procedural issues. But then, I don't know if do I really want to discourage them as advocates, even though they're annoying? The answer to that is ultimately no. You just want to let them know. And, certainly there will be some of them say, I know about the suspension of the rules. You can't fool me. I would have picked that up in a second. But I have my doubts. let's say, especially when they're the same folks usually running around saying, how come she's asking for unanimous consent? That's a terrible thing to do, because someone will block it and then that'll be the end of it and it'll never come back. And everyone knows once you suffer some sort of defeat, you're finished and your bill can never be brought up again. And that's not true. Anyway, the other story I wanted to tell you about the revival of this legislative language was, yes, Rashida Tlaib did turn her amendment, if there was one, and I believe her on that, into a freestanding bill. And guess what? It was H.R. 9050. Pardon me. 9050. As I mentioned earlier, the bill that actually passed the House was H.R. 9051. Coincidence? No, of course not. The two were submitted right about the same time. But the answer to who submitted the bill first, it is Rashida Tlaib's beat to the punch anyway, whoever it was that filed 9051. And now I can tell you. Now, there may be an H.R. 9049 out there that is in fact targeted at the same thing, raising the check numbers to $2,000, and it might be by somebody else, and we can check that, and I don't know, maybe we'll find an answer there. But at any rate, the parlor game that I wanted to tell you about is a real favorite. Rashida Tlaib, what committees does she serve on? She's, first term, so, not likely that she's going to have real plum committees. But let's see, Rashida Tlaib, committee assignments. We'll just put committees and see what happens here. All right, so on her House page, she's got a committees and caucuses thing. Committee on Financial Services. So that's, I think, a pretty exclusive committee, but it's not Ways and Means, which is where this bill went. And Oversight and Reform. All right, so she doesn't serve on Ways and Means, who was the committee of jurisdiction for this thing. So anyway, so here's the game, right? She submits H.R. 9050 to do what she said she wanted, do what the president said he wanted, do what she says she advocated for during the Rules Committee hearing on the original bill, but it just didn't work out. So here's what happens. You submit H.R. 9050. Everybody says that's a great idea. They refer it to the House Ways and Means Committee for quick action to turn the thing around, send it to the floor. It lands in the hands of House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Richard Neal, who then says, I've got an idea. How about if we consider my bill, H.R. 9051? And it does exactly the same thing that Rashida Tlaib's bill does. Exactly. And in fact, it has the exactly same language as Rashida Tlaib's. But I'm the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. So which bill are we going to pick up? There are now two that do the exact same thing. I suggest, just a suggestion here, I suggest we consider H.R. 9051, authored by the Honorable Richard Neal of Massachusetts. And it will be the Richard Neal bill that raises those checks from $600 to $2,000, not the Rashida Tlaib bill. And that's what happens. And it happens all the time. And it would have probably happened even if Rashida Tlaib had been on the House Ways and Means Committee. Then they would have said, well, we want to have a markup and change one little thing. And by the way, if you really want this thing to go smoothly, why don't we make this the Neal Tlaib bill? But stealing credit is a major pastime in Washington, D.C., and it shouldn't surprise anybody that was going to happen. I think that was entirely predictable once you figured out that the thing was actually going to move. And, well, it probably would have. If you'd asked me at the time, if I had remembered to tell you at the time, I would have predicted for you that it was going to be stolen. By the way, just in case we're wondering here, what is H.R. 9049? We'll see if we can't get a quick read on that. All right, well, it's something different. It's to amend Title 18 of the Social Security Act to establish a cancer center construction grant program. So, okay, that has nothing to do with anything. So, I don't know. And just out of curiosity, what about 9048? Maybe somebody snuck in this cancer construction program. No, guess not. Okay. So, maybe she was the first one across the finish line on that one, and congratulations. And that probably means that, yeah, she already had the legislative language written. They're only 1-page, 2-page bills, so you can probably compare the two texts side by side and see exactly how much was borrowed as between them. let's see. Oh, maybe we'll do that. Here's the HR 9050. Oh, the text isn't published. That's the problem. By the way, somebody else had also said, hey, one of the people involved in the feud between, or the alleged feud, anyway, between the Tlaib and AOC camps says AOC is not even listed as a co-sponsor of HR 9050 anyway, and she's not, as it happens. And you would think that she would have been there right at the start. The usual suspects. There's only 3 co-sponsors, and it won't surprise you. Pramila Jayapal from Washington, Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts, and Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, very close allies of Tlaib's, but you would think AOC too, but apparently not. Whether or not their names were both on the amendment that was supposed to be brought in the Rules Committee, I don't know. Still haven't been able to figure that one out. Okay, so I can't compare the 2 texts for you directly right now. I think the text of Tlaib's bill is floating around on the internet somewhere. It's just not in congress.gov. All right, moving along here. There are many other things to get to. But awful lot wrapped up in the procedure there. As I said, next up is the Senate. And Schumer has proposed, I don't know whether he's had a chance to move it, or attempt to move it by unanimous consent at this point yet, but he'll go ahead and do it. And the fact that it might not work does not actually change anything. And they'll be able to bring a full vote later on, whether it passes that way or not. So no worries about that. Let's see. Other things to bring up. Gosh, there's a lot. Some new developments on the legal front where Donald Trump continues to insist, that he won the election and he's going to, I'll show you all on January 6th. Louis Gohmert, for some reason, has filed suit against Mike Pence. I'm not sure how he hopes to make this work, but as I understand it, he's seeking some sort of, maybe he wants like some sort of declaratory judgment, or I don't think he's looking for a writ of mandamus here or anything, and I don't think he can do it yet until he doesn't get what he wants on the 6th, go the mandamus route. But anyway, he's looking for a judgment that would clear the path for and then insist on Mike Pence exercising what is largely imaginary power to simply rule that some other slate of electors, at least for the state of Arizona and maybe some other states as well, are in fact the legitimate ones. Those fake electors, and remember in the case of Arizona, the supposed electoral votes that were cast and fake certified and maybe even sent to Congress weren't even cast by the would-be Trump electors who had been on the ballot for the general election. They were just a bunch of other Republican people who felt like doing this thing. But they're suing Pence, and I don't know that that's a great approach to getting Pence to do what you want, but maybe. It could be a friendly suit. You're forcing my hand here. But suing to, for a declaratory judgment ahead of time, the courts would clear the path for the legality of Pence on January 6th, simply saying either that the fake slates of electors are the real ones, or at the minimum that there is a controversy as to which of the two in his hand are fake. And that the houses need to resolve into their respective chambers and decide this thing. And we all think, anyway, that we know how this would come out or how it would probably come out. But this is a weird situation. And also, I guess there are some other weird permutations to it. Like if Pence were to simply rule that these Republican electors, or fake electors in the case of Arizona, are the real electors, and so therefore Trump really won. It's not entirely clear how you deal with that in the joint session, because there's no mechanism for appealing the ruling of the chair in a joint session. And I guess in Gohmert's mind, that means that his ruling would stand. And I can't actually rule that out entirely. Although actually asking a judge to rule on it ahead of time is probably the dumber thing to do. It's probably better just to go and do that thing and then see if any courts would intervene to stop it. This actually has been anticipated, believe it or not. And I will mention for the record that there is a remarkable law review article out there, remarkably prescient law review article out there that discusses this possibility. Where it's in the Loyola University Chicago Law Journal, not Law Review. It's different. Law Journal is a different thing. Edward B. Foley, does he list his credentials? He must somewhere in here somewhere. But is it easily accessible? Professor where? Okay, he is. Foley is the, you want to know the whole title? Ebersold Chair in Constitutional Law and Director of Election Law at Moritz, Ohio State University, Moritz College of Law. So, okay, Ohio State University Law School professor and of constitutional law. Basically what you need to know. Anyway, in when? The winter 2019 edition of the journal, he writes out an article under the title of Preparing for a Disputed Presidential Election, an exercise in election risk assessment and management. It's very thorough, and it's very, eerily foresighted. Is that how we're going to be describing this? I'll give you the abstract, the italicized abstract up at the top of this thing. This article considers the possibility, and remember when this is, winter 2019, right? Before COVID, but also, well in advance of most people's discussion of this situation. This article considers the possibility that a major dispute over the outcome of the 2020 presidential election could arise, even without foreign interference or some other extraordinary event, which we then did have, but rather just from the ordinary process of counting ballots. Building upon previous research on the blue shift phenomenon, whereby adjustments in vote tallies during the canvassing of returns tends to advantage Democratic candidates, it is easy to imagine a dispute arising if this kind of blue shift were consequential in the presidential race. Using examples from both Pennsylvania and Arizona, two states susceptible to significant blue shifts in previous elections, the article shows how the dispute could reach Congress, where it potentially might metastasize into a full-fledged constitutional crisis. The most frightening scenario is where the dispute remains unresolved on January 20th, 2021, the date for the inauguration of the new presidential term, and the military is uncertain as to, not who they're going to back in all of this, but as to who is entitled to receive the nuclear codes as commander-in-chief. Another issue we haven't really discussed very much. In order to avoid this risk, Congress should amend the relative statute 3 U.S. Code Section 15. It's the Electoral Count Act in common parlance. But, there was no chance that having been put on notice in the winter of 2019, they were going to actually change this thing during 2020. That's much too quick for anybody to act on things like this normally. And they didn't. And we're right where we said he would be. It's really kind of eerie. And he picks out two states. It's not terribly hard to do, but he focuses first on Pennsylvania, which is really where Trump put his time. And almost as if Trump's so-called lawyers had read this thing ahead of time and began planning for this, except Trump's lawyers aren't reading any law journals or review articles. I'm fairly certain of that. They're not reading anything. But it's also not that hard to predict. And it was predicted for those of us reading, either listening to the show, the things that we read here, or reading along, doing it on your own. All the wargaming of contested election scenarios happening in late summer and early fall of 2020 had the same focus. And my guess is, they track so closely, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that Edward Foley was involved in either organizing or at least participating in those war game situations. So anyway, it's a long article, and I can't read you the whole thing. Just suffice to say, they really do a good job. He does a good job predicting where we would land and where we have landed. The only difference is that really the continued analysis of this thing, he breaks it down into three parts. From November 3rd, the general election day, through December 14th, when the Electoral College votes. Then what could happen from the period of January 6th, when they count the electoral votes, through January 20th, when they're supposed to be inaugurated. And finally, well, actually, it's interesting. It's titled the same thing, same period, January 6th through January 20th. There's analysis, there's what could happen, and an analysis of the Electoral Count Act and what could go wrong really on January 6th and the subsequent days. And then analysis of the Arizona alternative, as he calls it here, a slightly different approach to January 6th. And then the role of the Supreme Court in potential electoral count controversies as analyzed next. The big difference here is his analysis, and it has to, in order to get anywhere of interest, you have to then assume that, okay, not only are there fake slates of electors sent, but they have in fact been given the imprimatur of those states' Republican legislatures. That's, I guess, why people landed on Pennsylvania and Arizona as places to predict that this might happen. There were places that had Republican legislatures and were probably polling pretty close, and, as he said, where there had been this blue shift before. Blue shift, by the way, just his name for, and I didn't Greg use this term too? Just his terminology for late breaking vote counts going the Democratic way. Places where the population concentration makes for slower vote counting on the day of the election, but also population concentration, meaning a blue tint to how people are voting there. They didn't even anticipate the extreme dependence on mail-in voting thanks to COVID-19, but that did the trick too. Anyway, be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue this discussion, I think, where we left off, except I just can't remember exactly how we left it, and then I got distracted reading new fun things to share with you. But yeah, the Law Review article, or the Law Journal article. Essentially, the big difference between what he predicted and where we stand now is that, really, in order to keep things interesting and keep them going and to have any legal basis to stand on whatsoever, the author makes the assumption that the Republican legislatures would, in fact, bend to Trump's request to meet and purport to exercise their constitutional authority to change to change who the electors are for their state. And there's all I can do because of the legal twists and turns that things make. I didn't want to hang any labels on it, but you'll recall from the earlier Wisconsin case, which we discussed a couple of now weeks ago, where the theory was that the Wisconsin Republican legislature could take back its constitutional authority even post-election and say, because the Constitution by its terms gives the state legislature the right to decide, to determine the manner in which the state's electors will be selected. They have the right, and in early days they actually did do these things, not in Wisconsin, but in the earlier states, simply appoint presidential electors directly from the state legislature, not from the state legislature, although probably they were from the state legislature, as it turns out, because who else would they give those seats to but themselves? But that they could make the decision, and there would not necessarily be any popular referendum on who the electors ought to be. And then we changed that pretty quickly and gave everybody the right to vote for our presidential electors from each state. But it was the Wisconsin theory that this could be done after the fact. And I mean, this is the big hurdle that they're trying to get over here, and they really can't, which is that that the state legislatures could initially decide, let's have a popular vote to determine who the electors will be, and then say, I don't like the outcome of the vote. Let's undo that and appoint some new ones ourselves. And I figured, and it turned out to be correct, that it's not hard to figure that this one would be the case, that the courts would say, no, you can't have two bites at the apple. If you decide ahead of time that it's going to be a popular election, and then you hold the election, that's it. You've decided the method and the manner, rather, in which the electors will be selected, and it's an election. And though you could change it, you really need to change it ahead of asking everybody to actually cast their ballots. You can't just change it afterwards because you don't like the outcome. Now, there's some weird permutations to this, and one of them is, well, for one thing, as other courts have subsequently noted, and courts will note, I think, in the Louis Gohmert case, and as is noted here in this law review article, you can't just say, all right, well, we don't like the outcome, or even come up with another excuse. They did say it's possible courts could contemplate that state legislatures could take up this power post-election in certain circumstances, but the circumstances would have to be essentially more or less universally recognized as a true emergency of the sort along, I need to give you a hypothetical, but because it's never happened, but it would have to be an emergency along the lines of there was a giant nuclear attack and all of the ballots got blown up, or it doesn't have to have a nuclear attack. We literally, all the ballots caught on fire and they burned before we could count them. What do you do, right? I don't know. Or all the machines, everything. Something stupid has to happen, right? Or intentional, I guess, has to happen. In which case, everyone would generally recognize there's a serious problem here. And in order for Wisconsin or whatever state to participate in the Electoral College, you don't have to, I guess. You don't have to send anybody. But in order that the state be represented, there the state legislature might say, well, we can't count the ballots. It's impossible. Through no fault of our own, we cannot count the ballots. If we want to participate in the Electoral College vote on December 14th, the legislature is simply going to have to designate a slate of electors ourselves. I mean, I suppose if it happens on November 3rd at 9 p.m. just after the polls close or something, I suppose you could say, well, how about if we hold the vote again? But, even that probably wouldn't pass muster because, of course, all the results from all the other states would come in. And if Wisconsin were pivotal, it would be unfair to allow people to be, to polled again. I don't know. But you'd have to come up with some crazy situation in order to justify, in the court's mind, most courts anyway, allowing the legislature after the election has been held to say, we're going to name electors ourselves. And one of them would be, through no fault of anyone else, and certainly no fault of anyone in the legislature, all the votes have been destroyed, or it's impossible, or the election's been hacked and we've proven it, and everything is cockeyed, and there was 1 million votes for Mickey Mouse, and we have the fingerprints of the Russians all over, whatever the situation is. Under those circumstances, you might be able to do this post-election. But we don't have that situation. Now, this is where the Trump lawyers have, I don't know, they're clinging to some thin reed. They're saying, well, we really do have that kind of an emergency. Really? What is it? We were nuked? No. They're claiming, well, the massive cheating on behalf of the Biden campaign that we allege actually happened is that emergency. And you said that in a real, true emergency, we would be allowed to meet and designate new electors. And this is such an emergency. And of course, the court says, if you're being extraordinarily generous, fine. You want to waste some more time. I've got it. Let's waste it. you need to prove to me that this emergency happened, because there's actually like 99% of the country does not believe that this emergency occurred. That's far cry from universal recognition of emergency circumstances, right? So prove to me anything. Got anything that says that this emergency happened? And, the Trump lawyers say, no, we don't. Outside of court, they say, yes, we do. Inside of court, where you can get in real trouble for saying yes when the answer is no, they say, no, we don't. And that's the answer, and they don't. And so the courts say, well, we don't have those circumstances. So no, the legislature can't just meet and change its mind about how to conduct the selection of electors and who those electors will be. But a lot of people are just, a lot of people. 5 people have got together and said, yes, we can anyway. And we're going to go ahead and do that. What's different about the law review article is the law review article contemplates a situation in which the legislature actually gets together, convenes an official session, and says, our electors are going to be Donald Trump electors for this state, and then certifies that in some way as memorializes it in a resolution and sends it on to Congress. That has not happened. Now, that has not actually stopped Louis Gohmert and the other crazy nuts who are filing these lawsuits from saying it has happened, which is also kind of insane and should be sanctionable. And I think if there are any sanctions in any of these cases, it might be on this basis, that they are filing pleadings that allege or come really, really close without actually saying it to alleging that these alternative slates of electors, as some people are calling them, the nuts are calling them, are in fact endorsed by the state legislatures. They are not. No state legislature, Republican or otherwise, has acted in the manner contemplated by the law review article here that would actually give them some leg to stand on January 6th. But that hasn't stopped them from claiming it. And the claim is, well, the state legislatures didn't act to prohibit us from doing this thing and mailing it. We used the Capitol complex to cast our fake votes. And I still don't know whether anybody actually used a legislative chamber to do it. It won't make any difference, of course, because it's not an act of the legislature, just because it happened in the legislature's building or even in their chamber on the floor there. But they're making this claim that either we weren't prohibited from doing it, or they gave us permission to use their grounds, or some state legislators actually participated in this. And I think Arizona may have followed up the fake one without even using the Trump would-be electors they may have sent a second certificate. I think I saw an article that alleges that some, rump faction of state legislators, Republican state legislators, convened what they said was a meeting, but wasn't, obviously, and essentially signed a petition, which they say is supposed to stand in the place of an actual official resolution from the legislature. They're trying anything. They're counterfeiting every document that they can think of to try to get the stuff into play on January 6th. I still don't see how any of their paperwork ends up in Pence's hands unless somebody in the office of the president of the Senate says, I am going to send these things to the floor. And it's possible. I mean, Pence has been apparently, at least tangentially, involved in some of the weirdo crackpot powwows. I shouldn't say that. That's not I forgot that, once again, this is one of those terms we were trying to get rid of, purge from our lexicon here. Especially if you're going to compare it to a crackpot bunch of weirdos having a meeting to do something stupid. That doesn't make any sense. So that's in the forbidden pile there. Apologies for that one. Anyway, so they are having these meetings trying to plot out some kind of strategy. And if Pence is around, the implication is that they're actually trying to tell him, yes, you should be doing the kind of stuff that Louis Gohmert is going to sue you to try to force you to do. Anyway, so here they are trying to fake up documentation to bolster the claim that these other strange counterfeit documents are meant to be considered and deserved to be considered on the floor on January 6th. But I don't know how they get into his hands other than Louis Gohmert waving it around on the floor. But there's not even any procedure for Mike Pence to say, the chair takes note, or the presiding officer takes note of the gentleman from Texas waving a paper around. Rusty the bailiff, go get that thing and bring it up here, and we're going to add it into the record. There's not even a way to do that. Of course, he could just simply say, I want to do that. And somebody might say, I don't know, the guy in charge is in a suit and he told me to go get the thing, and it's right there. I might as well go get it and bring it to him. And, and there's also, similarly, there's no mechanism for anybody from the floor saying, what bull? You can't just take that paper. The ones that you got to read have been handed to you by the office of the president of the Senate, and the secretary of the Senate sorted them out. And you can't just bring in other crap here at this last minute. But I guess if somebody goes and grabs it and hands it to Pence, there's not even a mechanism for saying, let's have a vote on whether or not that BS can fly. It's so, it's at some level, it's possible that Pence just says, to hell with it, I'm going to do these things. And unless somebody physically tackles me and prevents me from doing it, I'm going to do it. And you'll be in the position of suing to say that was illegal. And you might be right. But for right now, I'm doing it. This article actually contemplates some of that, by the way, and surmises that Nancy Pelosi, presumably again Speaker of the House in this scenario, says that's it. The House is withdrawing from this joint session. And by the way, this joint session is taking place in the House chamber, over which I exercise control, and she could kick the Senate out and, in fact, have the Sergeant at Arms kick the Senate out and bar the doors to the Senate re-entering the chamber. And we won't continue with this count. The statutorily described and constitutionally mandated count of the electoral votes. And we're simply not going to reach the conclusion of this count. We're going to do something else unless these guys give up the ghost and count only the legit documents. We're certainly not going to have the joint session in this chamber, and there won't be any official participation from the House either. Republicans can go to Starbucks with the rest of them, or the Senate could try to say, let's have the joint session in the Senate chamber and just have everybody squeeze in. And, at that point, there would be no Democrats probably in attendance except for one to object to things on the Senate floor. No Democratic House members, Republican House members only, but without the constitutional leadership of the House present and participating, you don't have a legit joint session there either. Could they counterfeit that? I mean, all of that is contemplated in this article, and it's really fascinating. And it describes the kind of trouble that you can make and how long you can drag it out. But it all depends on having a legislature somewhere say, yes, we did this thing. And no legislature has done that. So now the only question is, can Mike Pence just say, there's no mechanism for me to make any decision like this. It would be against all the rules. But what are they going to do? Hit me with the mace and say, no, that doesn't count. I don't think that they're going to. So I'm going to do, but that also depends on Mike Pence would have to be like an extraordinarily dynamic and charismatic figure to carry something like that off. And he's not that. Anyway, it's just very fascinating. I recommend, if you can stomach sitting through or reading through law review or law journal articles that are, tend to be pretty dry. It's quite fascinating. The only other mistake that you can see right off the bat, and he explains why he makes it, is that at the time of the writing of the article, Elizabeth Warren appeared to be leading in the polls from the Democratic primary nominating process. And so his article goes on to assume that she wins the nomination and is the Democratic nominee to face Trump in the general election. But you can overlook that, just substitute in Joe Biden's name there, and everything else is pretty much the same, except for that one departure where the state legislatures refuse to do something as stupid as these nuts are asking for. All right. Wow. It was really surprising, and it's really, it ends up just where we all have been modeling it ourselves. It ends up either in the House and Senate on January 6th, or even if they stretch it into January 7th. And that, by the way, makes no difference constitutionally, just so long as the process begins at the appointed time. It doesn't say when it has to end. But if it drags out until January 20th, well, then, yeah, Nancy Pelosi should be preparing to assume the role of acting president, and that causes all sorts of other complications, including her resignation as Speaker of the House. But I think, mostly it comes out where the Houses resolve and the Senate either says, no, this is stupid, along with the House, and then that resolves everything right then and there, or the Senate, because they're Republican dominated, says yes to the objections. The House says no, and then you have to try and resolve what happens. And there's an interesting possibility there, too, that gets explored. And I think we've discussed this one in one of the war game scenarios from a couple of weeks ago, maybe even months ago. The question of what does it mean to have a disagreement between the houses and how does it get resolved? There was one theory upon which, and this has to do with what's happening in the lawsuits too. This is a very weird situation too. The statutory description of what you do in electoral college disputes is that if the houses don't both agree on it, then the objection fails. So if you're objecting to the slate of electors from any state, all states, what have you, and Republicans are contesting it and they get a senator to sign on, if the House says, no, we reject the objection, and the Senate says, yes, we accept the objection, the statute says, without agreement, the objection fails. There's an argument being made that, one, the constitutional plan disagrees, and two, that the Constitution, being the Constitution, trumps the even federal statute. Statute is just statute. Constitution is the fundamental law here. And the argument is that the Constitution appears to say that the power to decide what to do in these cases resides with the President of the Senate. And the President of the Senate can resolve the issue of the disagreement. Although most of the arguments are that what would happen is that the President of the Senate would say, what's within my power is to say, we will simply not count the electoral votes of Pennsylvania. In most of the wargaming situations, the electoral college outcome was close enough such that the elimination of Pennsylvania's 20 electoral votes for Biden would flip the outcome of the electoral college vote totals, such that a majority of the, what do we have, 538 minus the 20, so 518 electoral votes would be in Donald Trump's hands, and he would, if it were a legitimate outcome, or they landed on the outcome of eliminating Pennsylvania's 20 votes for Biden, a majority of the still existing and accepted electoral votes would be in Trump's hands, and he would be reelected to a second term. But that doesn't happen in this scenario, because I think even without the electoral votes of Pennsylvania, Biden won enough other states that it would still land in his hands. They need to invalidate more states than just Pennsylvania alone. That, too, is not contemplated in the article because, if you needed more than one state, you'll never get there. No one would ever try it. It's way too stupid. But here they are trying it anyhow. Okay, so anyway, very fascinating and lots of permutations to it. Other things. Oh, yes. Here's the update on what's happening in Arizona. And I feel like we should check in on that since we've invested so much time in it at this point. We might as well talk some more about it. From ArizonaCentral.com. Let's see. This is originally from the Arizona Republic. Fake Arizona electors vote for Trump. Real Arizona legislators ask Congress to accept them. So this is sort of the latest on what happened here, although it's from December 14th. So I feel like it should have been included in our first roundup of this thing, but maybe not. This is an opinion piece on, the facts of the case here. Lori Roberts And her opinion is this: a group of Republican legislators want Congress to accept, quote, alternate electoral votes for Trump. They have completely lost their grip on reality. That's true. So, but my question is, are the fake electors the same group of nuts that we heard about the first time? And what didn't we hear about? Were they the ones with Mr. Schween and Mr. Wang in Arizona, or was that elsewhere? Or are these the would-be electors for Trump getting together elsewhere? It seems to be implied that that's the case. I didn't know about the involvement of any legislators. Anyway, the election is over, the Electoral College has voted, and the never say die, unless it's for Trump, Arizona Republican Party continues with its delusion that the state's election was stolen from the president. If state GOP chairwoman Kelly Ward's Republican Party was a person, I'd guess it might rate its own entry right about now in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Yeah. Something in the denial category, an extreme defense mechanism employed when its leaders simply cannot cope with the reality that they lost. On Monday, the state's 11 electors met as required by law. That would have been, what was it, last month? I don't remember. Or was it before then? I'm losing track of time. But December 14th. Right? The state electors met as required by law and cast their votes for Democrat Joe Biden as required by law, given the fact that he, won the election. Also on Monday, the state GOP's 11 fake electors met as required by no one and cast their non-existent votes for Trump as required by their desperate need to continue to live in fantasy land. I kind of like this. The party even sent out a press release, headlined Arizona Republican presidential electors convened to cast votes for President Trump, Vice President Pence, along with an all-smiles picture of the 11 fake electors. Then came the 3-page joint resolution of the 54th legislature, in scare quotes, because it wasn't one, asking Congress to accept the 11, quote, alternate electoral votes for Trump, or, quote, to have all electoral votes nullified completely until a full forensic audit can be conducted, whatever that might even mean. And I guess they mean of all states. It's not shocking that Ward and a handful of fringe legislators would buy into kooky conspiracy theories of the many ways in which Democrats stole the election and fake electoral votes designed to ensure that Trump prevails. What is a stunner is just how many legislators have descended into this lunacy. In all, 22 Republicans who will be in the legislature when it convenes next month, nearly half of the GOP caucus, signed this resolution, which they wouldn't do if it were a real resolution, urging Congress not to accept Arizona's legally cast electoral votes for Biden until there's an investigation. At this time, no such audit has been authorized, they note. This leaves the uncertainty of the election results in a state that requires further investigation and resolution, and copious amounts of medication. Please, send help now, she continues. The 22 Republicans, plus another 7 lawmakers who were either tossed out by the voters or are leaving by choice, note that the Senate Judiciary Committee on Monday called for an audit, rendering the election inconclusive. First off, of course, these Republicans have no actual power to do a darn thing. Their colleagues couldn't even hold Monday's committee hearing without getting permission from Senate President Karen Fann, which I guess they didn't get. So I'm pretty sure they have no power by themselves to order an audit or to render the election inconclusive. Not when the results already have been certified by all 15 counties in the state, after all the checks and cross-checks for accuracy that are required by law. Not when judge after judge has tossed out their various lawsuits, noting any lack of actual evidence that, a lack of any actual evidence, I should say, that the election was stolen, but never underestimate a politician with delusions of grandeur. The United States Congress is not to consider a slate of electors from the state of Arizona until the legislature deems the election to be final and all irregularities resolved, they wrote in their, quote, joint resolution. And I'm sure it'll be accepted. I mean, it even has a state seal on it and everything, so it must be real, right? So they go on to say, here's who's backing the mess, in case you want to know, out there in Arizona. Here are the Republicans who signed the document. Senator-elect Kelly Townsend of Mesa. Representative Brett Roberts of Maricopa. There's more, of course. David Farnsworth, a senator also of Mesa. Kevin Payne of Peoria. Mark Fincham of Oro Valley. Sonny Borelli, Lake Havasu City. Hope I'm pronouncing it all right. Well, maybe I don't care. Leo Biasucci, Anthony Kern, David Cook, just to name some names, but I think I'm going to run out of time. But I'll share the list with you. Still not clear to me is whether this is a different group that sent the originals or whether this is the would-be Trump voters, and it doesn't really say in this one too. Okay, very weird. Just thought I'd bring it up to speed and let you know what's going on and share the fun opinion piece, very strong opinion piece from Arizona Republic. Okay, when we come back, last segment, and Joan McCarter. We'll be right back after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter joining us now from the climate-controlled comfort of the Idaho studios. Sorry. Okay. So a little bit of work going on at the house lately.
Yesterday was quite exciting with a new furnace and air conditioner and water heater and 2 dogs. And
water heater too. Jeez. It's the whole thing.
Water heater too, yeah. Well, you know.
Right. You find out there are such great improvements in energy efficiency that they just have to charge you more money.
Right.
I've been through that.
It turns out that the furnace, if it wasn't a 115-year-old
Wow.
leaky house, the furnace might have killed me by now.
Okay. A little extra
yeah.
carbon monoxide, right?
Carbon monoxide, gas furnace.
Yeah.
Cracks in the heat exchanger. So
everything goes.
And 22 years is a long time for a furnace, so that's okay. But because that had to be changed, the air conditioning hooked to it, which was 18 years old, well, that had to happen too.
And if you're doing that,
and
you might
the
as well
water
do one
heater
of those.
is 20 years old, so, we're doing it all. And
yeah, well, okay.
Yeah.
How's your roof? That's next.
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. Wow. All right. Well, yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad that's behind you, and that I hope you're comfy for the winter, and I'm sure it'll be great. And you'll make it all back in energy savings in 111 years.
Right.
Right.
It's like I had to take out a loan to do it. It's a mini student loan here.
Man. Yeah. Okay. Well, that does happen from time to time. But other than that, how's it going? Will
Other than that,
$2,000?
it's lovely.
Okay. We spent the first half of the first 3 quarters of the show, as you might expect. We began with the passage in the House of the legislation raising the tax rebate checks, I guess is what they actually are, from $600 to $2,000, and the prospects in the Senate. Went through the fact that they did this by suspension of the rules, which is a little bit of a surprise that it worked right off the bat.
I was sort of surprised that they could get the 2/3.
Yeah, and now
it was
they have,
it was tight for a while. It was quite tight for a while.
So depending on what you know about the situation. Now here, listeners to the show can say they barely did it. Everywhere else they're saying overwhelming margin.
Right.
But you understand why you could say either one, and it's just as well. It's actually better for us that the reporting be that the senators pick up the newspaper and it says overwhelming margin in the House, including 44 Republicans, because now they start saying, wow, we have about 44 Republicans that might do this.
Yeah, the 44 Republicans part is key.
Yeah.
because you do have, well, you've got one loud Republican in the Senate saying they've got to have this money, and that's Josh Hawley, which I still don't entirely understand.
Yeah. Like, what? He's right. Oh, no.
But, yeah. I mean, he is so awful on absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But on this, he's been really good.
You got to take it where you can find it. And, his motivation may be weird and different, but, if it does the right thing, you allow him to be right about something, and then go back to beating him up, I suppose. But
I guess.
Yeah, it's weird, but okay,
so
we'll take it.
We don't know what's going to happen in the Senate, other than McConnell will probably try to do UC today, unanimous consent, to get the National Defense Authorization Act to veto override tomorrow.
Okay. Unanimous
Sanders
consent to hold the vote
object.
tomorrow?
Bernie Sanders is going to object to that.
All right.
Until he gets a vote on the $2,000 survival checks. And Ed Markey's backing him up. It's the Democratic conference is unanimous in this, that they are going to back the effort to get that $2,000 vote.
Okay.
So then we don't know what happens.
How long would we have to? McConnell will ask for unanimous consent to hold the override vote tomorrow. Would he otherwise have to wait until some later date?
And he could try to invoke cloture today, but there's not going to be 60 senators in town today, probably.
I see. Yeah, okay. So, right, okay. So there's a sort of proxy filibuster on, and the Democrats would vote no on proceeding to the override until there was a vote on the $2,000 checks. And if he wants to bypass that, he has to invoke cloture, but he'd have to file today. Did he file yesterday? Did he file anything? I don't know.
He didn't file yesterday.
Okay. So if he files today.
So they could actually end up voting like on New Year's Day.
Hey, it's fun. They would still be the correct Congress and everything. They
Still the correct Congress.
Okay.
Everybody would be a little bit cranky about that.
I'll bet.
It's hard to know what he's going to do. Loeffler and Perdue would probably like the opportunity to say, yes, let's give everybody $2,000 a week before their election in Georgia.
Yeah. Right. You would think. I mean, they are kind of crazy. And they may have earlier said, no, 600 is the proper number before Trump.
Well, it's important to remember that the whole reason that McConnell finally came to the negotiating table on coronavirus relief was because it was hurting Perdue and Loeffler.
Yeah. When it was zero.
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess because Loeffler doesn't really know very much about anything, and probably said, when they passed their 600, said 600 is the right number. And then Trump said, it should be 2,000. And she said, 2,000. That's what I meant. That's the right number.
Except wasteful spending.
Yeah. Somehow,
yeah. Because Trump was
Trump did it.
attacking everything. That Trump not understanding that coronavirus relief had been combined with omnibus spending because that's how you get everything through at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Somehow conflated the two and was thinking that they were the same thing, same bill. And
right. And
who knows?
COVID relief had weird foreign aid in it for some reason. No.
That his administration had requested.
And they had matched those things almost exactly. The whole thing was crazy. We didn't go through this.
So Loeffler seized on that part of it.
Yeah.
Oh, all this wasteful spending. Why are we doing foreign aid when we need to be helping people at home? But maybe I don't know about that $2,000 and if wasteful spending.
She's just really not. I mean, she just doesn't know.
So that was her approach.
Okay.
We don't know. We just don't know. It's also possible McConnell would try to do something like wrap up $2,000 survival checks with repealing Section 230 of the Communications Act.
Yeah, that's what Trump said. He said he had a deal for that, and that's a lie.
He does not have a deal for that. But it could, one way McConnell could poison survival checks.
Yeah, that. And, of course, Trump also claimed that the deal said, plus also they're going to, both the House and Senate will launch investigations into all the voter fraud. And that seems like, no, that's no
No.
such investigation.
No.
Certainly not in the House.
Where he came up with these promises is a mystery. He did have that meeting last week, the end of last week, with some of the House maniacs.
Yeah.
Maybe they promised it to him and he believed them.
Yeah, I mean, he may have no idea. Of course, they said they could do it. They're very powerful congressmen. No, but whatever. He really doesn't know what he's doing, and it's not hard to roll him. And there was a great example of that. But this is apparently has always been his negotiating method. It's just that he's on TV and is famous before he was president, and so everybody, humored Mr. Trump in these deals. But apparently, people who have been present for his quote unquote negotiations have described them, and it's just he walks in and makes stuff up and says, I demand that, and depending on how desperate you are to have his name on your project, you either say yes or no. And when people don't care, they say no, and he goes, fine.
That's pretty much what happened.
Yeah. All right. Well,
so Senate's in at noon today when McConnell will say he hasn't said anything about any of this yet publicly.
Yeah, he doesn't know exactly what he's going to do, and we'll find. It'll be a big surprise. We'll find out at noon, and he's got between now and then to come up with what's the meanest, worst thing I could do, and will
pretty
I do
much.
It? Then I'll.
What can I do that will screw in immediately Schumer, and in the short term, Schumer and Pelosi, and then 20 days from now, 25 days from now, Biden.
Something like that. Right. He also, of course, is in the spot, like you mentioned. He has got to do what he can to bolster the prospects of the Georgia Republicans in the Senate runoff. And he may say, short term, I have to do what looks like a good and helpful thing, even if it makes me look like I'm agreeing with Democrats. I can survive that. And then later we can either undo it or just say, we lost that one.
Go ahead and put it on the floor, let Loeffler and Perdue vote for it, and have it fail, so he can say to Trump, look, we tried.
Yeah, right. There is that possibility as well.
That doesn't seem on the surface like something McConnell would do, but if he's pretty convinced that there aren't the votes there to do it.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's anything, thinking about it, like, okay, what happens to McConnell or anybody else if it just goes through? They get the $2,000 and he says, I don't think he's really worried about the impact on the economy as the deficit hawks say they are. I don't think he believes it'll be bad. I don't think he cares. He may want to be grinchy, but I guess if it goes through, it goes through. He's not that worried about it, I don't think.
No, except that, excuse me,
Sure.
Making things easier for Biden isn't on his agenda.
Yeah.
That's the main reason I would think he would be opposing it is that, this would give a boost to the economy for Biden.
Yeah, it could be. Right.
But, who knows?
Can deal with it.
He's almost as murky as Trump, except that, you can count on him to do the meanest possible thing at any given time. Yeah. And Trump, you can just count on to give you chaos.
Right. Well, we'll have to see, and I guess we'll have some indication.
But hey, how proud
plan
am I that government's not shutting down tonight, and that I don't have to be following that?
Yeah. Yes, right. Why don't we talk about that? That's also good news. We averted the shutdown. We do have the problems of the interruption of unemployment insurance to deal with, and that will be problematic. That did happen, and they've got to resolve that logistics issue. But
this is a big problem, worse in some states. For example, Florida did start kicking people off. Some of the other states didn't.
Okay, that's nice.
And it's unclear to me right now how that's resolved, whether Congress has to do a technical correction to the bill to try to fix it, to incorporate those 2 weeks, whether Department of Labor can just advise and say, consider this not canceled, even though, we missed by 24 hours. I'm not sure how. how it is going to be. I think probably the Labor Department could do it, could advise.
Yes.
But again,
will
some
they?
states did do the cutoff.
Yep.
And people
Count
are
on
going to
Florida.
have to reapply, and it's going to create more delays and
Yeah.
for nothing.
Right. No real reason behind it. Count on Florida to be on top of kicking people off of things.
Yes.
So, well, but at least there will be at least the government is open to try to deal with the logistics. You know, if the Department of Labor can do it, but it was shut down, that would be problematic. But it would be there to do this work instead. And we may be able to retroactively fund this gap where it exists, but even that will take some time, you know, and you can't tell people who are depending on unemployment insurance, well, we'll send that $300, but not for a month. You know, that doesn't really cut it. But so people are going to get hurt.
I'm assuming that they're going ahead now with the $600 checks.
You are or are not?
I am.
You are. Okay, yeah. All right.
So at least that's happening. So it's a little bit of a bridge for all these folks. Yeah.
All right. So some relief coming. The logistical nightmare of UI will get corrected eventually, but it's small comfort to say, oh well, we might have to wait for the Biden Labor Department to do it, and that, you know, we keep saying, well, it's only 3 weeks, but you know, if you can't afford food, 3 weeks is a long way to wait. So, yeah, I mean, he's created a problem and a potential disaster in the middle of the worst possible time, and of course, the pandemic, which makes it even 100 times worse. On top of which, we now find out that hey, we weren't very good at planning getting those vaccines to anybody either. That's not a legislative issue, but still.
Incoming, as they say on the TV.
Yeah.
Barb informs me that Loeffler and Perdue have both said they support the $2,000 checks.
Okay.
So, they agree with Trump. Which,
yes.
Of course, they had to say they agree with Trump.
Right.
So that does complicate things for McConnell.
Sure. Right. So now now we'll see, I guess, at noon what he thinks that means and whether he's interested in giving them a pass and finding, you know, other Republicans to make sure that this thing eventually fails. But I guess he won't be able to put together a filibuster of it for very long. So, all right. We'll see. What I guess about noon he'll come up with his brilliant plan, because he's an institutionalist, and we'll have some idea of how it goes. It may just squeak by. The more I think about it, the less I can see why. You know, other than saying I don't want things to look up with the incoming Biden
it's going to be really hard for them to say $434 billion. Yes, let's do this, and then come back immediately and say, but the deficit.
Yeah.
To everything Biden suggests. So,
in terms of honesty, sure, but in terms of their ability to say it,
if any of them have any shred of soul left, do this. Just do this.
Okay. I mean, got any plan B on that? Because they should do it, whether they have soul left or not. But it would feel good if you do have a little bit. You might as well exercise it rather than just let it die of atrophy.
You know, goodwill for all and all that.
Yeah, something about a season or whatever. Anyway, yes. So all this could happen, and it could happen in the next couple of days, and it could even spill over into 2021, but not Joe Biden's 2021, Donald Trump's rump 2021.
Right.
And he'll celebrate it and say it's awesome. And, you know, it may happen in the first couple of days. And then he'll say, see, I should be president again because I'm so awesome.
On the 6th.
Right.
This will be his argument. Maybe. And that's probably part of what's going on in his head. He doesn't care if anybody gets $2,000. He does not care about you.
No.
He thinks it will help him stay president.
Yeah. So
that the people will rise up in their gratitude and insist that he remain president.
Right. Now you
or
can
something. I don't know. Again, here I am trying to pretend like I know what Donald Trump thinks.
It's the best guess possible. He wants to remain president, allegedly. I mean, we think that's what he wants. He probably thinks that helps. You can, or now you'll have $2,000 to travel to D.C. and stay in the Trump hotel and protest.
Right, because it's opened up its bookings again.
Has it?
Did you see that? Yeah.
Is that what? Yeah.
As of yesterday, and 25% off, I think.
Oh, well, how
yeah,
nice.
They'd been holding bookings, waiting to see what was going to happen. But now they've unblocked all of the rooms that were reserved for Inauguration Week and are available at a 25% discount for anyone.
Oh, okay. So that could be very interesting and play out well. I understand. Just before the show, I got word that the favorite hotel, interestingly, of the Proud Boys is not the Trump Hotel. I guess that's too expensive for most of them.
Yeah,
they go and they stay for some reason. They hang out at the Hotel Harrington, about which I know nothing, but I'm reading this report here that the hotel sent word that they actually are canceling those bookings, I guess, for whatever reason. And so I guess maybe now...
Because they're afraid of violence.
That could be. That's a good idea. But I guess they've dealt with them before, and so they must know who these people are at this point. So they've canceled their block, and what a stroke of luck that a similar block has just opened at the Trump Hotel.
Opened up down the street. So, that's possible.
Okay.
Yeah, I did see one of the reports that said the likelihood of violence was what they just decided to close that day, didn't they? Entirely.
I think that is it. I only got to skim this, but it looks like you're right.
The hotel and the bar both. Because the bar is also the favorite hangout that's in the hotel.
Yeah. Well, probably a good idea health-wise as well. The health department should have closed them. Because, they're going to come and be unmasked and spreading it to the rest. They'll be leaving it behind and going back to wherever they're from later on, and we'll have to pay for all the medical care of everybody who catches COVID from them. But it's a wise call. I mean, easy enough. Like a block of guests saying... Can we have a reservation of 30 rooms for violent protesters, please? This might not be a good idea. You're going to come
Trump's
back
hotel.
Yeah, right. Bring it there. So, yeah, interesting. That should be, I don't know. We'll see whether it's worth watching. I mean, luckily, mostly their bark is worse than their bite, and I hope it stays that way forever until they disappear, and I hope that happens soon, too. I don't know if it really will, but...
It won't, but it's a nice thought.
It's a nice thought. Maybe you'd think these guys would get bored at some point, but they really love this. And hopefully things go better than they could, and hopefully there's no connection between them and
It's an interesting day for Mike Pence.
Yeah, right. He'll have to decide how crazy to be.
It's uncharitable of me, but I'm really sort of looking forward to what he has to deal with on the 6th. And I think it was probably a smart move to book himself on an overseas trip immediately following.
Yeah, right. Let's get out of here before they start coming after me. It is a smart thing. I have no idea what to expect him to do, just because, I mean, as a Trump loyalist, you know what he would ordinarily do. But Mike Pence just doesn't really have it in him to just say, to hell with everything, full speed ahead. I mean, you kind of have to be a certain kind of person.
You've got to be Louis Gohmert.
Yeah. And Pence is just kind of, I mean, he's evil and terrible and stuff, but he's quiet, evil and terrible. He's not a spectacle maker.
He's not, I'm sure he's willing to do some pretty darn shady stuff, but this is a little bit beyond shady. This is unconstitutional. This is glaringly unconstitutional. And if Mike Pence wants any kind of future at all in government, he can't. Yeah. And this is why Trump has been raging, apparently.
Yeah,
Pence and everybody around him have explained to him, no, we just can't. That's not how it works. I don't get to decide the electoral votes. I report the electoral votes.
That's basically it. I mean, you really have to be, you got to be a crazy showboater. There are people who would say, I don't care what the rules are and press forward, and they want him to do that because they feel like that's something they would do.
Did you see those tweets yesterday? Is there
yes.
Rasmussen polling?
Yes, but now I'm blanking on what they're saying.
They were saying that Pence should set aside Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania.
All of it.
The states where there have been cooked up Trump suits.
Yeah.
Set them aside, not count them, and then give the election to Trump.
All right. They were polling that or just recommending it? Like
they were recommending
it. Would be
it.
Fun. What are they doing in that space? Just not whatever they want.
Nobody knew.
I saw some mention of it, and I don't think it really struck me at the time until just now.
I have to share this tweet thread with you.
Please.
And they used a fake Stalin quote to do it.
That's right. I didn't know it was fake. Okay.
Yeah. Those who cast the votes decide nothing. Those who count the votes decide everything. It's apocryphal. Stalin never said it. But they open their tweet thread with a Stalin quote saying,
right.
Pence
something even Stalin was bad enough to say.
Can overthrow this because he's counting the votes.
Sure, he's not even in their scenario, but
there is nothing stopping Pence, they say, under the plenary and unappealable authority vested in him as president of the Senate from declining to open and count the certificates from the 6 disputed states.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the discussion in the first part. Is like, again, somebody who's unafraid of anything could just say, well, I'm not gonna, and see what happens. Like, will they hit me with the mace or not?
Right.
I mean, and they're not wrong in attempting it unless they do get hit by the mace. In which case, quite honestly, if that's wrong, I don't want to be right. But, he's just not that kind of person who will stand up there and do that. He'll walk out of a football game. He doesn't have to do anything, a negative action, but just standing there and they'll be hooting and yelling and screaming and throwing things from the floor. It'll be a very uncomfortable situation, and he won't have mother there or anything. And Pelosi will be next to him, and that's against the rules for him or something. So I don't know. But it could be a real weird situation, and the best bet is he just goes, I can't. And then everybody hates him, and the Proud Boys want to beat him up, and Trump yells at him, and there's no chance to fire him yet. You might even need him to do a pardon. So who knows? There's still that hanging out there. Man, it could be wild. His
best bet is just to, do his job like he's supposed to do it, and then immediately get on an airplane and get the hell out.
Right. Even a better bet is run away before and let Grassley do it.
Yeah. And apparently they had discussed whether or not they should do that and decided against it.
I guess Grassley was like, no way. I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do. I'll count, but that's it. And so, it's going to be a weird week. And so we'll see. The override, we'll know what the plan is. That might carry over into New Year's.
Probably. I mean, I'm sure he's going to go into this with a plan, right?
McConnell, yeah, I guess, but who knows what it's going to be? But I guess we'll find out. He's going to speak. You say at noon.
Yes,
that's when they'll open. Okay, so
he's in at noon. Oh, and newsflash now, Rubio is also for the $2,000 cuts. So there's 4 Republicans.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's predictable too. I don't know whether he read it in the Bible or anything. Or maybe he got a memo from the University of Sioux Falls, told him how he should be voting on that thing. Did you catch that photo of him getting his vaccination?
Yes.
And so you saw the
twerp.
And did you see the shirt he was in?
Yes.
So you did see that. Okay, so he's that was pretty amazing. But jumped the line, got himself the vaccination, and then went right back to it's all a hoax anyway. So.
Right.
What a fun guy. All right. Well, let's see.
And we didn't even get into how bad the vaccination system is screwed up.
Yes.
So,
they have a week to
talk
resolve.
about that with you tomorrow, right?
I'm sure. Yeah, we'll be talking about that with Greg and watching the floor today and tomorrow. By next Tuesday, it will be 2021, but again, not Biden's 2021. But we'll be figuring out. We're looking back at what happened and getting ready for them to count.
Will it be our new Congress? Day?
Yeah, I think so. Right. What's next Tuesday? Yeah. I don't know. Quick check the calendar, but if Friday is New Year's Day, then Sunday is when they're going to switch over.
Yeah, so next week we'll be into the new Congress. Yay!
Excellent. All right, so we'll visit with you for the first rundown of what's happening in 117th Congress. And hell if we know, but hopefully we will by next time. Thanks again, Joan. Have a happy New Year in between now and enjoy the heated comfort of your home.
I will. Thank you.
All right, catch you next time.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam is up next. We'll find out perhaps what new appliances he's had installed in his home at great expense. But we'll find out much more from around the country and around the world, no doubt. Ooh, Alexander Vindman, I see, is in the news. How about that for a teaser? Let's find out what he's talking about from Justice